For today's installment of the Paris-Brest-Paris preparation seminar series, I have invited somebody here to talk about bicycles in all the facets that we can dream up. Selecting a bike, what kinds of bikes historically have been used, what sorts of things to focus on for bikes, and chose somebody here that is very familiar with building bikes, with maintaining bikes, with riding the bikes, and specifically on PBP and elsewhere, and what other riders have chosen. Basically, our guest today here has had experience in a long time frame and seeing quite a number of different people from around the country go to PBP, and while at PBP has had experience seeing what riders bring from other countries here. So today's guest is Bill Bryant. Bill has quite a pedigree with Randonneurs USA, and also a pedigree that comes well before the existence of Randonneurs USA. Bill's experience with bikes begins quite some time back in the 70s, when Bill was a mechanic in shops in Davis, California. And through that experience there, he met some people that he helped with his mechanic skills. And those people went to Paris-Brest-Paris among some of the first Americans to go. I believe that the first Americans went in 1975, and Bill got some of his cohorts from the Davis area over to Paris-Brest-Paris in 1979, which would have been the second time that a sizable American community went. Bill himself rode Paris-Brest-Paris in the early 80s. This would be 1983. For his first one, and returned in 1999 to ride on a tandem and successfully finish. In between those years, Bill continued to go to France for Paris-Brest-Paris and was able to see the event unfold before him as an observer. He also attended PBP as a volunteer twice, in 2007 and in 2015 or 19. And has been over quite a number of times in multiple roles. I think in 2019 you did both bike check, where the bicycles are checked over quickly to see whether they fit the lowest standard of safety for the ride. And then also as a control volunteer, where you saw, Bill, riders both outbound and inbound, and could see what made it to that second checkpoint. So today, Bill and I are going to have essentially a conversation about his experiences and some of the observations that he's made over the years. Bill, did I leave anything out of your introduction there?
No, it sounds fine, Rob. Nice to be with you.
Great. So let's start with what you saw as far as PBP bikes back in 1979 and when you yourself rode in 1983. What were some of the things that you saw? What was the variety of bicycles that you saw at that time?
It was probably more narrow than it is now. I think then you typically saw rugged steel frames, racing frames that you'd enter in a road race. That was the standard bike of the day, or maybe a sportif model where you could put fenders on it and some lights, but still the essence of a lightweight racing frame. Most in 79, 83, a lot of people were on tubular sew-up tires and rims, but by 83, clinchers were starting to make themselves be seen in the club riding scene of Europe. Baggage was often carried. You could tell the riders, if they're from the continent, very often they had a largish front handlebar bag, if they're from England or the US, quite often they had a saddlebag, maybe a Caradies bag, just as we see today. The lights were awful. Generators were used, they rubbed on the tire or the rim, but the output was feeble. And if it rained, and of course it did rain back in the olden days, that's why we had fenders, they'd often slip. And so you just dreaded nighttime rain because your light may not work. And so there are some horrible battery lights often carried as a backup, but riders would really gather together at night and try to ride, sort of massing their headlights because of the crappy lighting that they had. That's been probably the biggest change since then. I mean, you saw Brooks and EDL leather saddles, just as you see today. You saw most bikes just had frame shifting levers, which you still see, but nowadays you see more of the shifting up on the handlebars, or of course now you even see electronic shifting. But in some ways the bikes look familiar to me. They're loaded down with layers of clothing, fenders, low gears for when the randonneur is tired and the hill is steep.
I wanted to ask you about the fender part.
Oh, sure.
So did you see more people using fenders back in 79 and 83?
Yes, you did, because full fenders were required at PBP in those days. It was considered a touring event, not a racing event. And the fenders sort of emphasized the point, this is a touring event, and racers, weren't welcome. People certainly went fast, but they did it with fenders on their bikes. I should also note, in those days, there was no advertising allowed on your clothing. You saw club names on maybe a little on their chest or something, like I've got here for Randonneurs USA, and that would be it, or maybe down the sides, but it would be just the club name and that was all. Or perhaps a national jersey. If you'd come from overseas, you would see like a Belgian themed jersey, or from some other countries. But by and large, it's just your regional club cycling jersey, or plain. You just saw people with jerseys of 1 or 2 or 3 colors, and that's all that there was, which wasn't unusual. Remember, this would all be the time before Lycra, where nowadays you can print up all sorts of logos. We have event jerseys. People earn different jerseys from finishing an event, and they show those off at PBP. Of course, then
your mention of nowadays there being more Lycra kind of raises a little theme that I can sense happening here.
Yeah.
And it's this transition from things, and this ties into a comment you made a little bit earlier about how horrible the lights were.
Yes.
And nowadays the lights are much better. Mm-hmm. So we have progression of lighting.
Yeah.
We have progression of clothing to more technical clothing nowadays. What I wanted to ask was, did you see quality of fenders change over time? Were they pretty reliable and durable, or were there problems with fenders back then?
No, I would say fenders were similar. SG, which has become SKS, which is still virtually the same product. I still use them. Or the old Blumels were very popular with riders. Also, some of the French rider had the nice aluminum fenders, but they were rare even in the 80s. And so you saw them using SKS or Blumels fenders, pretty common. They're also less expensive. Cycling, I would say, was more of a blue collar sport on the continent than in the US. The US, if you could afford a trip to France, you probably weren't going to be blue collar. But a lot of US riders might have had a college degree. That wasn't true with, I'd say, a lot of the randonneurs from France and Belgium and all.
So you mentioned that.
If I could, but I'm gonna double back on you, Rob, a little bit about clothing. Yes, clothing has become more technical, but in those days we had lots of wool, and you'll remember that Brest is Paris's rainiest city. So the fenders on the bikes weren't just some affectation that, the fenders usually got used pretty seriously at Paris-Brest-Paris, and so did wool clothing. Lycra is easier to launder. It can be less expensive, But like the 2007 PBP, where it's 4 days of rain and cold and fog, and it just was dreadful. The riders with wool clothing were really happy that they dragged them along. So many American riders still favor wool clothing. It's technical in its own way, with its hollow fiber from Mother Nature, but it's just expensive and it's hard to launder and all that.
Right.
But it still has its place when you're riding around the clock on a 1200K and you're soaked to the skin. Wool will keep you warm when some so-called high-tech garments don't do as much as they promise.
Yeah. So for rain gear, have we seen a progression of that getting better?
Yes, I would definitely say the rain jackets you can buy, or hats and things, helmet covers are definitely better than we had in the old days. The old days, they were just sort of horrible, cheap, shoddy jackets. Now the technical gear that you'll see some randonneurs using really is quite good. And the other thing, we of course, helmets weren't widely used. They're still not required at PBP, but I've done sort of an informal count, and I'd say 90 to 95% of participants choose to wear a helmet. And that's probably not such a bad thing. Of course, in the old days, we just had wool caps and cotton caps if it was sunny and hot.
Right. So there's two things that I want to not lose track of here. The first one I think is a good segue to another topic and another related topic, of course. So we just talked about rain gear. And you certainly don't wear your rain gear the whole ride, sunny or rainy. So you've got to carry it somewhere. This is a segue to the bikes and carrying capacity.
Right.
So what sorts of things have you seen change from the late 70s, early 80s to nowadays?
As I mentioned, it was real normal, as it is still. You'll see many people using a largest handlebar bag, but even that won't carry all your gear. So there might be a smallish rear rack, and they would have maybe their raincoat and a wool jersey kind of bundled up and strapped to their rack. That's not unusual to see nowadays. What is, and there were a lot of Caradies or canvas British saddlebags back in the old days, and they still work quite well. I'm a fan. However, if you start thinking about all the stuff you're going to put onto your nice, lightweight, sporty bike to do PBP, well, fenders, I think, are a good thing. Your lighting system, some backup lighting, your bags to carry stuff. Then, of course, the things in the bags, layers of clothing, some food, tools, repair, inner tubes, things like that. It all starts to add up. And so you think about the weight of everything. So I weighed a Carady saddlebag, and I don't ride a leather saddle. I ride a nylon saddle, which doesn't have the saddle hoop. So I use a bagman support. And so a Carady's bag and a bagman comes in just a little under 3 pounds. Okay, fenders by themselves are just 1 pound. If I could just take 1 pound off my gear, that would essentially mean that the fenders are riding for free. Well, nowadays you see these, I want to call them bike packing bags that sort of are nylon fabric, and they sit under the saddle. They're a saddle bag, but they're not transverse like a Carady's. They run fore and aft.
Right.
And, there's two things going on there. One, they eliminate the need for some sort of supporting rack, which is a good thing. You save weight there. But the other thing is they're more aerodynamic. And now most randonneurs would just kind of scoff at the idea of aerodynamics. But 2019, out on the route, all people could talk about was that darn headwind that was in their face from Rambouillet to Brest. And they felt, some riders were feeling like they were getting to Brest an hour or so longer, 2 hours longer than it would have taken them under more normal circumstances. Well, aerodynamics do begin to come into play. And if you've got all your stuff directly behind your rear end instead of sticking out to the sides of your hips, maybe that matters. Or if you're, now I'm veering into clothing, but if you have a big, loose, floppy windbreaker, that's, flapping in the breeze, that's not so good. So, you want something a little more sleek and a little more aerodynamic. But anyway, we get back to the bike bags. I would say more and more, I'm seeing the bike packing bags that are more aerodynamic on Randonneur saddles now than the traditional Carides bags. And I guess that's a good thing. It's a progress that seems to be working out pretty well.
So as an observer for all of the events, PvP events in between when you were actually riding, and for the times when you were a volunteer, particularly in 2019, when you were out on the course, as well as having done the bike check at the start, what sorts of things did you see that either struck a chord with you as, yes, this seems to be working, or more specifically, what did you find things that didn't work at all? Well,
maybe from working in the bike check or looking at the bike racks at the controls where I was stationed, I think people shouldn't get hung up that you need some super fancy, expensive racing bike with top of the line Dura Ace or Campagnolo record components. A lot of people ride the next tier down. They might have a good, middle range road bike that has like Shimano 105 components or mid-range SRAM or Campagnolo components. And they are using something like a road bike that they might do club rides on, or a Century or a Gran Fondo. And then they're using these various bags and lights, they're lashing everything to their handlebars, which isn't always successful, because your handlebars, you start to run out of space on your handlebars when you think about handlebar bags and lights and all this stuff. But still, they're taking kind of regular road bikes, just as I saw in the 70s and 80s, and adapting them for randonneuring. I don't think you need to go out and buy a specific randonneuring bike. I think randonneuring is like a big tent that it welcomes all sorts of riders. And what's interesting is how they approach the same goal of earning a medal. Some of them are on super lightweight racing bikes. Others are on lightweight racing bikes that have a lot of stuff lashed onto them. Some even carry a little backpack to carry a couple clothes, like a jacket or something, because they've run out of space on their bike. And then you'll see people on recumbents, on tandems, on fixed gear bikes. You'll see mountain bikes with road tires. You'll see all kinds of, pardon me?
Velomobiles?
Yeah, you see all kinds of human-powered vehicles, and that's basically the only rule. It has to be solely human-powered. Obviously, e-bikes are not going to be welcome there. Now, when you say what hasn't worked out, what was interesting in 2019, I wasn't aware of anybody in 2015, but 2019, I saw, I think, about a half a dozen people on the big, really fat wheeled, like snow bikes or mountain bikes with super wide tires. I think I counted about 6 outbound. Lois and I were stationed at Fougères at 300 kilometers, and we saw, and I counted about 6 riders on fat bikes. And on the return, I didn't see any. So maybe they came through while I was taking a nap, but I kind of think maybe fat bikes maybe aren't the best equipment choice. Now, I guess I've thrown down the gauntlet and someone's going to try and prove me wrong. Right. But I would imagine you probably have a support car to keep your bike as light as possible. And you could sleep in the car so you didn't have to wait in line at a dormitory at the control or something. But if the bike is just really heavy and doesn't roll real well with real heavy fat tires, may not be the best choice for an event where there's some standing in line to get controlled, or standing in line to get food, or standing in line for this, that, or the other thing. PvP isn't as efficient as like your local brevet, where you kind of walk up, get controlled, get some food and go. You can be in and out of controls in 5 minutes at a local brevet around the world. But at PvP, you will lose time. You might have your slowest 600K getting to Brest. because
Yeah.
of the lines and all. So
Yeah.
I would recommend people really think seriously about an efficient, lightweight bike. I know of one fellow years ago, he tried PBP, I think 3 times, and then, but he always failed from gut issues, digestive issues.
Mhm.
And he decided the thing that worked for him on brevets, and he did it for 600K, was eating gels, sports gels like goo and other things like that. He carried 1200K worth of gels, like
Wow.
a couple 300 calories per hour. And if he's riding about 60 hours or thereabouts, and his bike at the start, I went to pick it up. I could hardly lift it. It was stupendously heavy. No prizes. He got to Brest and he was exhausted because of the hilly PBP route.
Right.
His bike was too heavy. What he needed to carry was money and spend money for food. But for whatever reason, for him, the only thing that worked was gel. And he did, I will say, then the next time he did it again, he modified his eating and he did successfully finish, I think, I want to say 3 or 4 times unsuccessful. And he finally did earn his medal some years ago. But it shows you the length people will go to in their head. They think they have to do something in order to be successful, or they want to be successful, like riding a fat bike or something unusual. Like Sophie Matter had sort of a woman's commuter bike a few years ago.
I think it was a 3-speed.
Yeah. And Drew Buck from England, he had Johnny Onion, even less efficient, bike of the Breton onion sellers that go take the ferry to England and sell their onions around Britain in the old days.
Yeah.
So
Before we get too far away from Johnny Onion, I wanted to have you give a little bit more background so that people have context for that comment. This is a well-known British rider who he's been to PBP
many times.
Yeah, at least a half dozen times, perhaps. And he certainly in the last 4 iterations chose to ride a not just vintage bike, but a historical bike.
Mm-hmm.
And the instance that Bill is referring to, he wore the costume of a farmer who many decades back was a typical channel crosser. They would grow onions in the fields in Brittany, hop on the ferry and go sell them in England, and then come back having made some money to do that. And so he wore the guise of one of the inhabitants of a long bygone era and rode a bike from that time.
Yeah.
He's also ridden, I think in the last iteration, or maybe this was 2015, he rode, it was some kind of a racing style bike, but a racing style bike from at least a century ago.
Yeah, like 1910 or something.
Yeah, right.
It was a 2-speed.
Right.
You could pedal forward and regular, and you could pedal backwards in a lower gear. It was from before derailleurs.
Yeah.
And the one thing I want to say now, Drew had ridden PBP successfully. Prior to all his historic reenactments, he knew what he was getting into.
Oh yeah.
If anybody is going over there as a first-time rider, I strongly urge them to ride a conventional bicycle and make sure you can earn your medal at least once. And then if you want to do something unusual, go for it. There's 2 Italian fellows.
So I think when Drew rode that bike, that was the pedal forward in one gear, pedal backward in another gear circumstance. I think that he had some mechanical issues at some point. And I'd like to use that as a segue to a conversation about what's the most prevalent mechanical issue that you've seen. Certainly flat tires are that. Yeah. Although, to give context here, I think most people that go there experience far fewer flat tires than they normally would across 750 miles.
Totally agree, Rob. The roads there are generally free of glass and debris. There might be some now. I've noticed a change. In the 80s, 90s, the roads were spick and span. You would puncture, but it was so rare. Many people would do the whole event without a puncture. That's normal. there might be a little bit more debris, like little wires from car tires, or a little bit more broken glass. But compared to American roads, I think we'll go over there and just be stunned at how nice the roads are.
Right.
In the old days, I'd say you would not see a pothole. Now, I think road budgets to keep things up are not what they used to be in France. And so I'm seeing a few more potholes, some, crevices and all. But again, it's very minor, and you can go there and descend with confidence at night.
Right.
You don't need real sturdy, heavy wheels. You can ride, kind of lightweight stuff.
Yeah, my experience over the times that I've gone, I first went in 2007, and I got to see a third of the course. And then 2011, 2015, and 2019, I got to see the whole course. And my take on the road conditions was that in 2007, it was stunning how wonderful the roads were. And each iteration, they were less wonderful, but still well above the roads that I'm used to riding here in California.
Yeah, 100%. When some of our rural roads in California are just falling apart, that is just, you wouldn't see that at PvP. In 95, there was a detour because of road construction. It was about 2 or 3 kilometers on dirt road. It was lovely dirt, and you could ride it, and it was at night. But so I'm not saying you won't see a rough road, but by and large, the roads are quite good. And just you want some attention. Make sure when you're sleepy, you stay on the road. That's, I think. And kind of, you asked me about what's the most prevalent repair. It's of course puncture or flat tires. There are punctures, something intrudes and causes your tire to lose air. But just as often, I've seen people doing a poor job installing their own tires and pinching a tube, or they've started the event on worn out tires.
I wanted to get to that point there.
That makes me nuts. You spend all this time qualifying, and as an American, all this expense traveling, and you can't put on 2 new bike tires just to kind of ensure your success.
So here's my approach to that, and you let me present it to you and see what you think about this. What I would think is the best approach as far as tires go is, first off, put brand new unpatched tubes inside new tires and ride them here in the States at least 100 miles.
Right.
But not too much more.
Right.
And that way you've done enough riding to confirm that you've installed them properly, and troubleshoot if you have to before you pack the bike away to send it over there. And then you are starting the event with essentially new tires.
I completely agree, Rob. And there's another benefit that's happening. When you put on brand new tires on most rims, it's a real tight fit.
Yeah.
It's a tight fit. When they sit inflated for a couple of weeks or thereabouts, they stretch a little bit. And once they've done that, then doing puncture repairs is way easier. Now at PBP or any other 1200K, you'll get tired in all of your body, including your hands. So when you go to, put your tire on the last little bit, a brand new tire at PBP, you could puncture in the first 24 hours. That can be a real chore. But by riding tires that have been inflated and stretched, you've ensured that you'll have the least problematic tire installation when you go to repair your puncture. So what I always recommend to people is, as you say, Rob, kind of get some good tires that will work well on your particular rims, ride them for a little bit, make sure they're good. And then I say keep them fully inflated on some other wheels for 3 weeks. And you'll go back and ride your other wheels in your final tune-up rides before you go to France. But then put on your good tires before you go to France, and you'll have the best of all worlds: virtually new tires, and they'll be stretched out a little bit. So,
would you say the best mechanical skill to learn is to change your own flat tires?
Absolutely. I can't stress enough the importance of doing a speedy, reliable puncture repair. reliable meaning you're not pinching the tube, or if you're riding tubeless, you're not mucking around with things that somehow make it take a long time. You should be able to change a tubular tire or a tube clincher tire in 5 minutes or less. If you can't, keep practicing until you can.
Yeah.
I've seen people, well, they take 20 minutes for a tire repair. What if they had 2 repairs? So instead of a total of 10 minutes for 2 repairs,
Right.
you're looking at over half an hour of lost time. By the 4th night for the 90-hour riders, or the 3rd night for the 84-hour riders, you will sell your soul for a 30-minute nap on that last night. You're approaching the finish, you're exhausted, and you're saying, could I just close my eyes for 30 minutes? You would pay a huge amount of money. If someone said, give me a $100 bill, you just throw it at them if they could guarantee you 30 minutes of uninterrupted sleep. Well, you kind of make your own luck. You need to get through your controls, a little bit of urgency in the first half of the event so you can kind of rest, take longer in the second half when you're bound to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
And same with repairing punctures. Don't start with any situation that's like self-imposed, like starting on worn out tires, or you pinch the tube or some nonsense like that. But then if you do have a puncture, you have to be able to get through it in 5 minutes. And that's not an arbitrary figure. I'm an experienced bike shop mechanic. I can do it in 2 minutes. Now I'm getting old and feeble and my arms aren't so strong for pumping the way they used to be. So now I use a CO2 inflator. So I'm still under 5 minutes. And that's with fenders and getting the wheel out and taking the tire off the rim and inspecting it, the whole thing. It isn't like a quickie, cheap repair where part of the tire stays on the rim. It's taking it off. I understand 2 minutes is ridiculously fast. However, people will wait for you if it's only 5 minutes. They will eat something, they'll fiddle around, they'll adjust some clothing layers. And about in 5 minutes, they're going to look and say, hey, is this guy worth waiting for?
Right.
And if you are ready to go, hey, you're in a group, and that's good. There's people to draft. And this is true for the brevets as much as at PBP. But if you're out there at 10 minutes, you might lose your companions. And if you're at 20 minutes, you're shooting yourself in the foot. It's horrible. And so you say, oh, I ran out of time. Well, what can I say?
Let me run something by you on the topic of learning the skill of changing a flat tire, and see what you think about this. So this is something that I came across. I wasn't particularly looking for this thing, but it was a PBP tip that I believe it was Pamela Blaylock, a name you might know.
Sure, yeah, Pamela.
So what she described, if I'm attributing this correctly to her, was learning the skill by doing the following. So at night sometime, you know, when you're spending some time in front of the television and you're otherwise just sitting there, take your tire, you know, get your wheel, take your tire off your wheel, put it back on, pump it up while you're sitting there watching the tire. So you're doing this in a very controlled and amenable situation. So you're learning, you know, what tools you need to use and how to use them while you can see your hands doing that. And then the next step would be to do it in low light situations. And so the next thing you might be to go sit outside in the driveway with the porch light on and swap it, and then move even further away from the light source and do the same routine, so that you are basically teaching yourself how to do this in progressively worse situations.
That's excellent advice. I like the progression of doing it in full light, moving to lower light, and then doing it out like there's no chair to sit in. You're kind of, you know, crouched over your wheel in the dark. And and this is a true story. One of the fellows from 1979, he did it at 3 a.m. on his lawn with the sprinklers going, because you can puncture in the rain, in the dark.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, maybe you'd say, well, that's a bit much. Not till when you've been there in a desolate, pitch black farm road on a brevet or at PBP, and it's raining and it's dark and you're all alone. What are you going to do? Now, the first thing, you want a little helmet light so you can see. Some people hold a little flashlight in their teeth, whatever. You need some sort of auxiliary lighting so you can look at your hands. Another thing is, look inside your bag. Is everything black nylon? I've got little bags in mine that are color coded. So I know one is, medical stuff, one is repair, one is my secondary, like my repair, I can repair a puncture. I know that's the blue bag. If I get a second puncture, I got to reach for the red bag because it has a second CO2 and a second inner tube and all that type of thing. Your brain, maybe on the third night, fourth night of PVP, gets very fuzzy. If you've done these things automatically when your brain is alert, you get good at what you do. And if you don't do it till the big event and your brain's fuzzy, all of a sudden 30 minutes go by and you're frustrated and ready to quit. Well, these are things that experience teaches you. And if you're a first-time PVP rider, I can't stress enough the importance of little things like Rob just described, progressively getting able to repair a puncture in the dark and with none of the niceties of home. If you want to throw in the rain, that's a whole nother thing. Listen, the people in 2007 PVP, they earned special respect. When someone said, "Oh, I'm a finisher 2007," I stand up a little straighter and give them a little bit of a nod of respect.
Agreed.
It was horrendous.
Yeah.
And the people who finished looked like survivors of a shipwreck, but they earned their medal.
Yeah.
And there were a whole bunch of people who did not. It didn't come down to fixing repairs on the roadside usually, but sometimes it did. It was their third puncture because of stuff being washed onto the road, and they just were frustrated and gave up. And sometimes that randonneur tenacity is what kicks in. You just have to suck it up and deal with it as best you can. And if you practice it before the big event, you'll be glad. So you're on a brevet, someone punctures, help them out. You're cheating them of their learning experience, but you're speeding up your learning experience. Or go volunteer at a local, there's some like bike shops or charities that give bikes to people who need them and stuff. Practice doing flat tire changes. I didn't learn how to change tires on expensive bikes. I learned on cheap 10 speeds, but then you transfer that knowledge to more expensive bikes and all. But it should just become second nature so you can do it in your sleep, because you might be asleep when it happens.
Yeah, right. Certainly half asleep.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, we've talked about fenders and lighting and bikes back in the 70s versus bikes today. And now we've talked a bit about roadside repairs, and we've talked about the conditions of the roads changing slightly over time. What have we skipped over that you would really like to impart?
In some ways, I want to be able to finish up just a quick hit on mechanical repairs. The bikes we're using in 1995 weren't fundamentally different than the bikes we're using today. Maybe it's carbon fiber, maybe it's titanium now or something, but with cabled shifters and rim brakes and what had clipless pedals, there's nothing new there. After tire and tube trouble, I'd say broken spokes or a broken shift cable probably are the next problems people might have. You should learn to be able to do a competent roadside repair there. And so you just need to learn how to do that. Pay a mechanic to show you and practice on that. Truing a wheel is a little bit of a art that some people have a hard time doing. But again, volunteering at your local bike charity outfit can help you learn that. And it just has to pass between the brakes, and you don't have to make it perfect. But carrying a spare spoke or two, or a fiber fix Kevlar rope spare spoke, something like that.
Yeah, with those fiber fix little things, I would really recommend, if somebody wants to carry that for their emergency, that they open that little package up and read the instructions, because it is not intuitive.
No, totally. I've built over 8,000 hand-built wheels. I have to read the instructions every time. So they're counterintuitive, but it means I can put that on any bike I own without having specific spoke lengths. But if you start your equipment start your event with well proven equipment and it's not worn out. See, some riders are going to start riding their bike like crazy from now, winter of 2022, all the way through August of 2023. You know what? Their equipment's going to be pretty worn out in a year and a half from now. So again, you know, have training wheels, but have event wheels, stuff like that. Make sure you're competent. The one thing I wanted to finish up with is electronic shifting, and that's becoming more and more popular. And I like it. It's easier on your hands, which again, PBP will wear out all of your muscles and dexterity and all this stuff. So I like electronic shifting from that standpoint. I've watched people though have trouble with it. Not so much that it's unreliable. If it's working for you here in the States doing your brevets, it'll be fine in France. It's that at the controls, the bikes are just stacked up at night, and you might park your bike, you come out after 3 or 4 hours sleep, and there's 6 bikes leaning against yours, and someone's pushing on one of your paddles, and it's drained your battery.
Right.
It's stuff like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with electronic shifting, but there might be something wrong that happens in the control parking lots. So make sure you can troubleshoot it. I would carry recharging cables and what have you. I'd be able to kind of troubleshoot, like, why is my bike not shifting right now? Has it gone into crash mode for something? Or, you know, who knows? But I've met riders who use electronic shifting, but they rely on their bike shop to set it up, to keep it running smoothly. All they do is just recharge it. End of story. Randonneurs need to be sort of self-reliant. And with bicycles, up until now, I'd say that was easy to do. Fixing a broken gear cable, fixing a broken spoke, truing a wheel, fixing a puncture, you're good to go. Now with some of the very sophisticated stuff like electronic shifting, I'd say some disc brakes are a little touchy, and you're going to travel with your bike. Make sure you know how to sort of fine tune these things. And again, that might require a little bit of extra work on your part in the next year and a half before you go to France.
Okay.
That's the one thing I'd throw out there about equipment.
Okay. So if we're considering our audience, among our audience is going to be a fairly large segment of people that will be going to PBP for the first time. And they might think that they want to get a bike different than the bike that they have right now. You might say, you know, now's the time to get that bike so that you have as much experience with it as possible. Let's talk about what's the no later than date that you would want to do that. For example, you know, we want to avoid the extreme of, and I think this opens up a wider topic too, of showing up to PPP on something or with some element that you are not familiar with yet.
Well, that could be dangerous for the rider. If everything goes well, they'll seem like they're a genius, and they got this nice new sleek bike that was 2 pounds lighter than their old bike, or whatever the reason is for, you know, I'd say, why are you buying a new bike? And I'll come back to the 3 things I think are essential for a good randonneuring bike. But when you say, is there some date? If you're working with a highly competent bike shop or expert on fit, so that your new bike fits exactly like your older one, let's say your bike fits great, no issues with, you know, a stiff neck or sore hands, everything's great. You just wish it was kind of newer, or you're moving from 9 speed to 11 speed or something like that. Right. If you're, the people you're working with can get exactly the same fit, okay, then that, you know, it can be pretty late in the game. Although I really wish people would ride all of their 2023 brevets on their PBP bike. So I would say January of 2023, you should have your bike really kind of dialed in. Every brevet, your qualifying brevets are must finish. the ACP are wonderful people. They want you to come do the event with them. They think it's great you came this far to do PBP. That's wonderful. They're great. They're great people, by the way. They're bike riders. They want you to be there. They don't give a crap if you didn't finish your 600K. They'll say, oh, well, we've got 7,000 other people who did, and we've got plenty of people from your country. So tough luck, come back in 4 years. They're not heartless, but they're not going to extend you any special circumstances to somehow make up for the fact that you really should have gotten your bike dialed in before your 400K and 600K, where 24, 36 hours on a bike brings up neck problems or numb hands or something like that. A problem we saw some years ago, people moving from frame shifters to brake lever shifters, they stick out a little bit farther and about 1 centimeter or 2 farther. And so people were reaching with their hands, they're getting all kinds of neck problems and hand problems. They need to shorten their stems. But in 91, 95, there was this rash of tendonitis and all from people switching over to brifters. Now, because everyone uses them now, they're kind of a standard thing.
Yeah.
But if you're making that switch from some fit thing, from a certain kind of a brake handle, let's say you're going from rim brakes to hydraulic brakes, those brake handles are different. Make sure you're not just measuring to the handlebars, you're measuring from your saddle to the brake levers and all that. So there's a lot going on with fit that isn't a problem on a 3-hour ride or a century ride. 12 hours, 24 hours, 36, 48 hours.
Yeah.
Well, for some of us, 45 hours is halfway through PBP. 90 hours is brutal. So you will see people quitting with various neuropathy and tendonitis and stuff, or Schirmer neck and things like that, because they're too stretched out or their handlebars aren't high enough or something. And so people coming from a racing background where the handlebars are low compared to the saddle height, randonneurs, if you look around at the experience, their bars are pretty high because they're on the bike so long, they just can't be that bent over. And so if you're new to our sport and your handlebars are lower than your saddle by a lot, I would look at raising your handlebars. And if you brought them 1 centimeter closer, maybe you'd be happier after 24 hours, things like that.
So from the bike perspective, is it a safe statement to make that you, as far as fit goes, you're going to be able to better answer your fit questions if you've done things like multiple 600s before you show up for PBP?
Yes.
So it's time on the bike. You can't, there's no shortcut to finding out the fit problems other than spending that time on the bike.
Pretty much. Bike shop people, their best fitters are probably going to be working with racers or triathletes, or older people who are getting stiff and things don't work anymore, so they're raising stems, stuff like that. But randonneurs, it's a real niche part of the sport of bicycling. And the things that happen from multiple days on a bicycle, most bike shop personnel are not going to be equipped to help you. When you find a fit specialist who is, you pay the money and you keep dealing with him. So when you get your new bike and what have you, you want to check in before your brevets and say how you're feeling and everything looks good. And then after, like, oh boy, my neck's kind of sore, or, my hands got kind of numb. Don't say, oh, I'll just shake it out and it'll be better next time because I have this in my experience now. No, fit problems tend to get worse with you. So I'm a big believer in riding multiple 400s and 600K events. The new qualifying method to get in line for PPP, so that we have to do events in 2022 to ride in 2023, is really good compared to the old days when we just had to do it in the year of. People would get fit problems, they'd get injuries resulting from fit in June of the year of PBP. They might have to take a month off the bike, they were so severe. Well, it wrecked their training. But now I hope riders will really be thinking about their fit. And as 2022 unfolds and you're doing, I assume, 200, 300, 400, you probably should do a 600 to get into PBP with assurance. I mean, I know you might get in with a 300 or 400, but just to get yourself ready as a first-time rider, try to do a 600 this year, and that'll get you a good starting wave next year. And then when you go and do your qualifying events in 2023, it should be no drama, no fit problems. You did all that the prior year.
I think this raises a really good historical discussion about the qualification part and how it shouldn't be viewed in a negative way. So what I mean by that is, and here's somewhere where you can correct a myth that I've picked up over time. But at one point, I believe that at least Americans, if not other countries, were required to do qualifiers 2 years in a row, the full series, 2 years in a row.
Yes.
Is that true?
That is true.
Yeah.
In 1979 and 83, Americans had a little higher than average DNF rate. And I remember, DNF is like something a lot of the French clubs really worry about. They get trophies, not for how fast they go at PBP, who had the most finishers. And so quitting kind of lets down your team.
Right.
And so DNFing PBP is not seen as a good thing by a lot of people in France and other countries. And so there's always this competition, like which countries had the best success rate. And there's informal pride and bragging rights about that. And so in 79 and 83, Americans did okay, not great, maybe like a third of the Americans would DNF or something, not real good when most countries would be 12, 15, 20% DNF. So we were above average. But in 1987
yeah.
PBP, the American DNF rate was shockingly bad. I forget the exact number, but I want to say it was like 47%. I mean, nearly half the Americans quit, which was strange because the Americans did great in individual accomplishment, fastest male, fastest female, fastest tandem, things like that, most tandems. It just, in some ways, there was individual success, but as a group, we sucked badly. And so the ACP worked with the old International Randonneurs saying, you got to change this. Your riders are taking up places of other people who might want to be here, who could finish and all. Mm-hmm. And so starting for the 91 PBP, 2 years of qualifying was required for anybody who wasn't a previous finisher. So like for me, I just had 1 year of qualifying in 91 because I was a previous finisher. But all the new riders had to do 2 years of brevet.
I wasn't aware of that nuance to it, that it wasn't every American.
No, they just said 4 Americans. Well, there are so few of us who had finished the prior events who are coming back. For most Americans, it's once and done because it's so expensive and the time it takes to do all that.
Right.
So when you look at the list of American finishers, most of them are just 1 year or one time, I should say. Anyway, so for 91 and 95, there's 2 year qualifying. And you could see their participation dropping off in America too. It was a real burden. So when Randonneurs USA got started, we said, we're going back to 1 year qualifying, and we did. And our success rate was pretty good. And in 2003, pretty good again. But not usually quite as good as the event amount, which is typically 15 to 18%.
Right.
In more recent years, it's been around 20%. Well, some countries in 2019 had horrible finishing rates. And I'm curious what will be put in place to encourage them to do better in 2023. My understanding is there might be some special qualifying criteria for them or something.
Mm-hmm. So what I wanted to comment on, and you may or may not agree with this perspective, but I looked at the current approach in terms of it's meant specifically to address priority of registering or from the standpoint of the rider, ensuring to a greater degree your ability to get in, so that you would do events the year before PBP to try and raise your highest, longest finishing event, and therefore earlier slot to pre-register. And I thought that that was, it shouldn't be looked at as a burden or as onerous. Instead, it's an opportunity for you to gain more experience and increase your chances of being successful. So that if this encourages people to do a 600K the year before, they now show up with at least 2 600Ks under their belt before they do PBP, because they'll have to do one in the year of PBP as well. So this is really, I think, a good thing.
I agree with you, Rob. I think it's a good thing too. I think if you had questioned me in the 90s, I may not have thought that, but with time, I really do think the new system is pretty good. For example, we had a local rider. She had done PBP several times, and she didn't want to do a whole nother year of brevets, but she did a lot of double centuries. And then she came and did a successful 600K. She did one extra randonneuring event the year before the last PBP and did just fine. She went and finished PBP like she always does. So it isn't like you have to do 2 years of series, but you should do like a 400 or a 600 just to show you're sort of still in the game. And I think overall, it raises the level of ability of a whole bunch of riders. Sometimes hubris is a problem. People say, oh, I've done this or I've done that. Well, that's different, like doing some big endurance race with a car trundling along behind you with lights and food and masseuses and all this stuff is not the same as randonneuring. Right. And I think doing an unsupported 600K teaches strong riders new skills they didn't have because they're maybe coming from a supported endurance racing background or something like that. Or for your average rider who is maybe done some centuries and maybe a double century, they need all the experience they can get, and they need to build up their confidence. And if they do a brevet series the year before PBP, they'll go into the qualifying really confident that they can pull this off and it's worth all the expense. In the days of just 1 year of qualifying, there were some very nervous people who weren't sure this was all going to work out, but they had their non-refundable airline tickets.
Right. Yeah. They weren't yet sure if they liked this.
Exactly.
Am I going to like that?
Yeah, so exactly. I actually have come around to be a supporter of the new method. I think it rewards participation and effort, and it helps sure people are going to do pretty well. Right. Yeah.
It helps grow the sport as well in that year before.
I might throw just a quick addition to that. Working at Fougères, which was at the 300K and 900K point last time, we had a bunch of people dropping out at 300K, which is way too early. You've hardly started the ride at 1/4 distance. You should know the controls are not set up to somehow get you back to the start. They're there to control riders going out and coming back. If you get out of the ride, you're really on your own. And so do everything you can to not be a DNF, because your life gets interesting when you have to get yourself back to Paris or Rambouillet, wherever you started from, not part of the ride. And so train harder, do your events in 2022, and just make sure you're going to be a finisher. And you'll be so proud of your medal. PBP is a life-changing event. And the first one. And I encourage everyone, don't go there with the idea. I've heard people say, oh, well, the first time is just for learning. Not everyone finishes. A whole lot of people do it their first time successfully, a whole lot of them. And don't go with the attitude that somehow it's normal to DNF your first one. That's simply not true statistically, and it's not in the ethos of our sport.
Right. So I wanted to link this, what may have appeared as a little bit of a sidetrack, are talking about the prior year pre-qualification effort into our general theme about bikes. And what the prior year pre-qualifying effort will help you do is, not just learn how you perform on a 600K, and so that you'll get more experience, but you're spending that time on your bike.
Yeah.
So you're finding out more about your fit and, you know, how your bike feels to you at 550 kilometers in,
Right.
as opposed to 50 kilometers in.
Right.
So, you know, there's the benefit there. And, you know, I would encourage people that have questions about, you know, am I on the right bike? Well, doing longer brevets in 2022 on that bike that you have questions about is possibly going to give you the opportunity you need to answer those questions and to either change your bike or get a different one.
Yeah, I agree.
Well in advance.
Here's 3 things I want riders to really focus on in 2022. Maybe they'll lead you to thinking you need a new bike, or maybe it won't. Number 1, your bike has to fit well. This means the frame size, the top tube length, the angle of the seat tube, you know, the relation of your hips versus the pedals, your femur length, shoe size, all these things matter. Your reach to the handlebars. Make sure it fits. Usually the bike you're riding can be adapted with a good bike shop to make this work. Maybe you need a seat post that kicks the seat back real far. Maybe you need a shorter stem. Maybe you need a higher stem. The bike you're riding probably can be made to fit perfectly. Maybe it's old, maybe the parts are kind of worn, and maybe you want something newer. Okay, but fit is something you can probably do with your existing bike and the help of a good bike shop. Excuse me. And then the other thing, it must be 100% reliable. As we discussed earlier, you can't take away the threat of a simple puncture. But beyond a simple puncture, your bike shouldn't let you down. Most people finish PBP with no punctures. They just ride their bike. That's all there is to it. Maybe they've got a puncture or 2. But other stuff, broken spokes, gear cables, all these are all things you can get out of the equation before your brevets. You know, work on that this winter. Maybe you need training wheels to thrash around on, keeping some special wheels for your event. Or maybe it doesn't mean servicing your bike and inspecting, like, are any cracks developing around the spoke nipples on your rim? A good mechanic will spot those. Things like that.
Or your sidewalls on the rims wearing.
Yes, yeah. If you're running rim brakes, are your sidewalls worn out from years of riding these wheels? Good point. So your bike has to be 100% reliable. The difference between riding some older bike that's in tip-top shape and fits well and something new is virtually nil. It doesn't mean much. You'll be faster at PBP from training harder and being efficient at your controls and not getting lost. That's randonneuring. But okay, your standard older bike that you rode for years, you want a new one, that's fine. But make sure it fits and make sure it's reliable. And then the other thing is, and this is where we got off in a little bit of a tangent about what bikes don't work. It should be reasonably lightweight. It doesn't mean it has to be cutting edge, sub 20 pounds, but
I think the term of art there is stupid light.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, lightweight, and there's stupid light that'll let you down during such a long event.
Right.
But like I said, we talk about fat bikes. Well, maybe you've got a mountain bike. I've seen people at PVP on mountain bikes with knobby tires. Okay, knobby tires on pavement don't make a lot of sense. But here's the other thing. They're heavy. They roll easier without the knobs. So don't shoot yourself in the foot. Or like my friend who brought, 60 hours of sports gels, his panniers weighed, I think, like 35 pounds when everyone else's might have one pannier with clothes and it weighed 8 pounds, stuff like that. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. So it has to fit, it has to be reliable, and it has to be reasonably lightweight. Those are the 3 things. After that, you go to the finishing corral of all the finishers at PBP, and you look at the bikes, the variety of age, of cost, of type. They're similar. They're got 9, 10, 11 speed drivetrains, maybe 3 chain rings, maybe 2, maybe 1, rim brakes, disc brakes, but it's kind of like a road bike, or it's a tandem or a recumbent or something. Some people are on a fixed gear. If that's what you're used to doing, more power to you. But the bikes aren't like the be all and end all. But if you're stopped by the road fixing a broken wheel that you shouldn't have never started the event on, and the same is true for your brevets, you just shot yourself in the foot for something I assume you care a lot about. PBP is really hard. Qualifying for it is really hard. I assume if you're going to do this, you care about finishing a lot. Don't hamstring yourself with subpar equipment, which isn't the same as buying a sleek new bike to have delivered in the spring of 2023. But if you can, great. I mean, it's nice to have a nice bike. I mean, you're spending all this time on your bike. It's nice to have what you want. But I don't want new riders to think that somehow they can't participate because they're riding a $3,000 bike, but they can't afford an $8,000 bike, that kind of a thing. It just isn't true. You'll see very modest bikes in use at PBP. People are coming from all countries around the globe. And for a lot of them, the bike they can afford would be ones most Americans wouldn't want to ride. In 95, I was helping riders. I was out of control. And this rider was sort of apart from the others. It was at a high school campus. And I could see him. He was stripping his saddle off his bike, his handlebar bag, and I think his lights. And then he picked his bike up and chucked it into the dumpster. And I stopped him. And in my crappy French, I said, "What are you doing? What's wrong?" And he pointed out the frame had broken. And it was a very inexpensive Peugeot. He said, "It's 25 years old. I wish, I had not brought it. I'll be back in 4 years." But he stripped off the stuff that was valuable and he just chucked the rest of it. Now for him, living in France, maybe PBP isn't such a once in a lifetime thing, but for most of us Americans or from Australia or Canada, it's a big trip and the cost of it. So you don't want to start on some crummy used up old gas pipe beater that you commuted on for 20 years, so there's a balance in everything, in moderation. You don't have to spend tons of money, but don't start on a worn out bicycle either. So.
Okay. Well, thanks, Bill, for sitting and chatting with me today about bikes and PBP. Just a reminder to the viewers that will be watching this on YouTube later, Bill is, along with having a long history of working with bikes in a lot of different ways, including building frames, Bill has also put a lot of effort into Randonneurs USA. Bill is the RBA currently, along with his wife, of the Santa Cruz region here in California. Bill has been on the RUSA board and you're a past president, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Right, and Bill also serves on several committees supporting RUSA as well. Bill is considered one of the founders of RUSA. You are RUSA number 7, is that right?
7, yeah.
So to conclude tonight's session here, I just wanted to ask you the question, RUSA number 7. Why did you wait so long to join?
Well, gosh, when we started RUSA, I volunteered to run membership, and I gave the lowest numbers to people I thought maybe were ahead of me with starting the whole ball of wax, and somewhere around 5 or 6 or something, I said, well, the numbers are up for grabs, and so I gave myself 7, and I gave Lois number 8, and I'm a little bit superstitious, and I like odd numbers more than even numbers, so that could be a problem.
So that's why it wasn't ladies first on that?
No, I knew Lois didn't care, and she was happy with 8.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Bill.
You're welcome. Happy to help, and I'm sure, contact people, your RBA in your region. He or she will have experience. They've seen riders be successful at brevets. They've seen riders be unsuccessful. They probably can answer questions about equipment. There's so many other things with randonneuring: navigation, pacing, nutrition. There's all sorts of, your RBA will be a big asset, but there's other people in your club too. Ride a brevet with someone who's done PPP, talk to them, and, you know, any equipment observations they want to share with you, things like that. So I think Randonneurs USA is a great organization, and they'll help new riders, but the new riders have to ask. And feel free to email
Yeah,
me.
ask the questions. Don't
Yeah.
wait for somebody to give you the answers
That's
ahead
right.
of the question.
That's
All
right.
right, thanks again, Bill.
You bet,
And we'll
Rob.
see you on the road.
You good. See you out there. Nice talking to you.